as I'm an EMDR consultant with the EMDR UK Association, and really this is one of a series of free webinars that the association is putting on for the benefit of members and also the wider EMDR community. And why am I doing this? Well, I guess as I came through my EMDR training, and we learn lots of different things, and there's a, as I'm going to say, EMDR has a rich history of innovation and bringing new things in. And the dream completion technique and the flash technique are things that are both quite close to my heart. The dream completion technique, much closer, because that's my PhD subject and that's my kind of work. The flash technique is the work of Dr. Phil Mansfield. But a lot of people I've organized the UK trainings for, and there've been a lot of people who've been on those. But this is hopefully going to A, give an introduction to all of that, but also B, tie it all together within the framework of EMDR. And it's really important to understand that these are not competing. You know, it's not like flash is a kind of replacement for EMDR. It fits lovely and complementary within EMDR. So it's really important that we get that right message. And is flash to be used in phase 4? Well, we'll talk about that, because flash it's both stabilization and processing in this in one and the same. But I'll talk about how that integrates in with EMDR obviously later on. I think I'm now going to press end polling, and then something's going to happen. I'm going to share the results, and hopefully that means people can just look through the results themselves. But as you know, obviously most people have completed the basic training, which is what I would expect. Half the people haven't heard of the dream completion technique. I'm hoping, I didn't put a question in there, but I'm hoping that the half of people who haven't heard of it actually watched the video that was in the invitation, the 5-minute animation. I'm hoping that's the case, because I really didn't want to repeat that animation today just because we're short of time, which is why we set it up. Maybe 1 or 2 people could just say that they've watched the video, if they hadn't heard of it before, that they've watched the video. Otherwise, I may be pitching it slightly too high if you've not watched the video. But interestingly, only 5% of you have attended the 2-hour teaching webinar, and there is an opportunity, and the link, I'll show you the links later on the 17th of July. So those are donation only, so very accessible. And I've had about 1,002 people through those over the last 2 months. Great, lots of people saying they've watched the video, and that's fine. That's good, because it's really important. This is going to be, you know, although I'm going to cover the basic concepts, I'm not going to be covering. I can't spend too long on it. So that's the dream completion technique. In terms of the flash technique, 34% no experience, not really heard of it. Quite a lot of people have read the journal paper or seen other information about flash, 42%, and 25% have attended Dr. Mansfield's live training or online training. And now again, we have another training webinar coming up on the 24th of July, which is a 6-hour training in all day. And I know this isn't, I don't want to make this a complete sales pitch, but hopefully by the end of today, you might think that would be a really useful thing to do. I mean, I've actually attended, because I've organized so many, I've attended it 6 or 7 times now, and I still get more from it. And so although flash is in fact, all of these techniques are simple, there is quite a bit of finesse to use them really effectively with complex clients. And then which version of flash? Well, I'll explain that when we get to the end, when we get to the section on flash. Half of you not sure what the question means, which is fine. So the question really is about, there's an early version and then there's a new improved version. And I see that 17% are still using the old version, and it's important to address that, and we will address that as we're doing this. Great. Okay, so I think what I'm going to do now, I'm going to stop the sharing the results. I'm going to welcome everybody formally.
I just know what happens most of the
Now, I have muted everybody. I'm hoping if you could just make sure you don't open yourself up again. just so we don't have any background noise. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to share the screen. We're going to look at we're going to mainly do it through PowerPoint, and we're going to look at the dream completion technique, Flash, and then the integration side of things. Please ask questions on the chat on the right hand side. So hopefully I'm going to leave 20 minutes at the end for questions, but we're going to I'm going to kind of be going quite not quickly through the PowerPoint, but there's a lot of information there, and I hope it's not too much. At the end, you will be able to watch a recording of this. There'll be a link that's on the EMDR Association website. And at the end, I will also share links for a quick survey of what you thought of today's webinar, which will literally take a few seconds. It's 3-4 questions, and it's click, click, click. A link to download a page of basically all the links to the trainings and different things that I'm mentioning here, and the other videos. There'll be a link to get a CPD certificate, and then there'll finally be a link for a podcast, which was actually released a couple of days ago, that I did with a very good network called Declassified, which is all to do with military veterans, but actually it's much broader than that. So if you want to know get another half an hour on the dream completion technique, that's really good. So I have just heard that not all microphones are muted, so I'm going to close any other microphones off. Like I said earlier, I'm the only one kind of doing this, yes, I've just got to be a little bit careful. And yes, someone's struggling to log in. I'm not quite sure how they're saying. They're on the chat saying it's reached the 500 limit, but they've not logged in. But so I'm not quite sure. But it may be that we need to do another one of these, but we'll see. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to bring up some slides, and I'm going to play those. Again, making sure that everything is good here. So, and I've done a lot of this introduction already, so I won't repeat myself. In terms of the objectives, understanding the key steps, benefits, and potential pitfalls of these two techniques, these interventions, which are ostensibly phase 2 EMDR interventions, but a bit more of that later. And then understanding how to integrate both with the 8-phase EMDR protocol. So they sit within EMDR. This is not, there's a bit of talk about, Flash versus EMDR. They're very different, but they're very complementary, and Flash fits within the framework of EMDR. But as I've already said, this is not a comprehensive training. So there's a 2-hour webinar for learning the dream completion technique in terms of teaching it to your clients. And there's a 6-hour Flash, which is a lot more interactive and includes demonstrations, practices, and learning by doing, which is quite important with Flash. But you're going to get a good idea of how the actual technique works today, even though I'm not going to be doing any demonstrations. But yeah, and I think I've already made this point, that EMDR has a rich history of bringing in innovation within the framework of EMDR. So it's not like Flash is anything different from what's already happened. And I'm a firm believer on building on the shoulders of giants. And the dream completion technique is an innovation of nightmare rescripting. And so it's just, everything is just getting that, better and better, which is great. That's how things happen. So in terms of how this fits, just so you get a sense of how these things fit within my work, I work in private practice. And although I get people coming specifically for trauma, I also get the general kind of gamut of private practice clients too. But if clients present with nightmares, whether they've got overt trauma or not, I will always resolve nightmares normally towards the end of session 1 or session 2. Then I may be using Flash to take off the worst distress of any memories that have come up through the case conceptualization. And then it's only if necessary. We may not need to do it. We may not need to resolve nightmares if there are no nightmares. And then it's about cleaning up with EMDR. So using EMDR processing and the bilateral stimulation. And I find that goes much quicker and much smoother when we've done the previous steps. And you'll understand a bit more of that as we go through, and how when we resolve nightmares, almost our natural healing, our natural trauma processing engine, which is the dream process, has been tuned up. And that then helps with EMDR later on, all within the framework of EMDR. That's really important. I'm not muddying the waters. I'm not saying it's EMDR and a bit of this and a bit of that. It's still EMDR. So over to nightmares. So what are nightmares? Well, they're extremely distressing dreams that wake us up. But obviously there's a continuum from kind of waking up at 7 in the morning thinking, oh, that wasn't very nice. You know, why was I sitting naked in a job interview, all the way through to I'm terrified of going to sleep. So I've got to drink myself into oblivion. And if I wake up at 1 in the morning, I know I'm not going to get back to sleep. And this is happening every night, day after day, year after year. And so those are the ones that are really most of a biggest an issue, obviously, and those are the ones that we're targeting. Nightmares are very common with trauma. In fact, they represent the unprocessed trauma, that is resulting in PTSD, which is the arrested recovery from trauma. But not everyone's nightmares are post-traumatic. Some people have what are called idiopathic nightmares. So, you know, dreaming about being naked in a job interview and then being humiliated and then waking up. That's an idiopathic nightmare, which kind of affects 5% of the population. But the trauma ones are extremely prevalent. And unless you ask at intake, you may not detect it, which is why it's so important to be explicit with that. And I generally, you know, I'm interested in how frequently this is happening every night, a couple of times a week, how severe they are, what kind of impact are they having? Is someone waking up at 1 or 2 in the morning and they're terrified of going back to sleep and they're, you know, and they're sweating buckets, or is it more milder? And then whether they're post-traumatic or whether they're idiopathic, whether they're the same thing every night or whether it's very different. Is it an exact replication of a past trauma, or sometimes it's a conglomeration of several traumas? What's also interesting to note is that they often endure after trauma-focused therapy. Hopefully not EMDR, because we know with EMDR that we can target nightmares, but we can really only target specific types of nightmares, those which are fixed and repeating, because that's how we would then target it. And that's exactly how CBT rescripting works as well. And actually, in terms of the types of nightmares that present, those are only about 30-odd%, or in my research, they were 30-odd%. So a lot of people have other presentations. They have mixed up nightmares, jumbling nightmares. They may not even remember their nightmares, but they're waking up screaming, or maybe even their partner tells them they're waking up screaming and they don't even remember. So the objective of the dream completion technique is early stabilization. We want to stop the nightmares and we want to return people to peaceful sleep. And it's the good quality peaceful sleep that allows the brain and the body to recover. And so obviously there are benefits from that in terms of improved mood, reduced irritability, and energy levels. But actually the biggest, most interesting thing with post-traumatic nightmares is that when people are sleeping through, that their natural trauma processing is happening. And on my research, which I'll cover a little bit in very quickly, and that's for those that put the technique into practice, their PTSD symptoms, as measured by the IES, reduced by about 50%, which is pretty significant. For some people, not very much, and other people a lot more. So, this is not a PTSD treatment. We're just stabilizing and just, we're just taking the top off. We're taking one layer off. Then Flash takes another layer off, and then when you get to doing your EMDR, it goes really nicely. So this is a state. The dream completion technique fits firmly in. It's a phase 2 stabilization technique. But I may send clients the video, the animation in advance. I may show it to them in session towards the end of session 1. Certainly looking for them to go away with an idea that they could do, put into their dreams. So the concept, what actually is it? Well, the basic concept, like rescripting, is that you can consciously introduce new ideas into a dream to stop you being woken up, allowing the dream process to continue, resulting in peaceful sleep. It sounds simple in concept. It's not always easy in practice. Particularly if people are having very traumatic nightmares about loved ones they've lost or friends that have been killed or whatever it is. But that's again part of the some of the stuff we cover in more detail in the 2-hour webinar to address some of the trickier questions. So the animation was really to teach everything in a very digestible format. And hopefully everyone here has watched it. If you haven't, you know, you'll get the links afterwards and you can see the link on screen. We don't have enough time to play it now. There are really 2 parts to it. The first is educating people about why we dream, because we all dream every night for 2 hours, and why nightmares occur, which is when the dream process, which is designed to clean out all of the dirty washing, if that process gets stuck, interrupted, the dreams run out of ideas, so we keep doing Groundhog Day, it's too intense, it wakes us up, all those reasons why the dream is not completing. And the task, the second part of the video, is really teaching people that at the point they're waking up in their most recent dream, that at the point they wake up, what do they want to happen next that feels good and is totally unconstrained? And that's it in a nutshell. But of course, it's about getting the right idea. And then they think, and if they come up with the idea in a session, that's brilliant. And you almost know that it's going to work when you see there's a kind of almost a transformation in their face. You'll see a little glint that it's going to work. And if it works first time, that's brilliant. But some people need to, you know, persevere. They might need to try a few different ideas. But the basic thing, and this is interesting, is in EMDR terms, the client is creating an imaginal interweave for their dream process to enable them when they go to sleep for that process to carry on. Very much as if you're doing it in a session with them and you're doing, you know, you're doing eye movements. So, and I like to tell people that the more they can work on their dreams and sort that out, sort the nightmares out, they're getting free EMDR in their sleep, which is, you know, which is great. So that's kind of the concept, as I said, simple in theory, but more complicated in practice. There's only just one other bit that's not in the animation that's worth mentioning, which is our normal sleep cycle is 90 minutes long. And we have these non-REM sleep, stage 1 and 2 light sleep, and stage 3 and 4 deep sleep. And then we have these periods of rapid eye movement sleep. That's when we're doing this. That's the EMDR process. That's the engine of the dream process. And that, you can see, starts occurring greater later in the night, which is when people have mild nightmares. You know, they're going to wake up at about 3 in the morning. And you'll also notice that rapid eye movement sleep is close to waking, which is why it can be easy for you to be pushed out of your sleep during rapid eye movement sleep. And when people are having nightmares and the brain can't process the material, they may be continually woken up and get back to sleep. But the thing that's not happening is they're not getting their deep sleep. That's the stuff that leaves you feeling rested. And so you could be in bed 12 hours, but still wake up feeling shattered. So one of the examples that's in the video is if you're caught in an avalanche. Now, it might be that you're in a ski resort and someone's killed in an avalanche, and you then may have a dream that turns into a nightmare about it, which would be idiopathic. Or maybe you had a close shave and nearly got hit by an avalanche yourself, in which case it would be post-traumatic. And the key thing is that what would you want to happen next? You know, you wake up at the point when the snow's coming over you and you're going to suffocate. What wouldn't work is skiing out of the avalanche in a state of fear. What might work is pulling ahead in a running race to rapturous applause. But not everything that works for one person will work for another. And if someone was their hobby was running, it's a no-brainer. It'll definitely work because they can connect with the feelings. The key thing is that ideas are taken into dreams on the back of feelings, whether it's bad, i.e. watch a horror film and you'll dream about it, or whether it feels good at a gut level. And that's what creating a new dream idea, that's the skill, is helping the client create something that will really work for them. And the other important category is if the client can't remember what they're dreaming about when they wake up. So if they were screaming, waking up screaming, you know, the thing that could work is imagining them going to sleep, imagining themselves standing on the, you know, the Austrian hills singing, you know, the Sound of Music. But again, it depends on the person. And so the skill is really coming up with something, or helping the client come up with something that's going to work. And I've now put an extended version of that animation on YouTube, which has got another 5 minutes of me talking like this, which gives more examples. So it's all about kind of preparing the ground, if you like, for the client. In terms of the research, that was a PhD at the Veterans and Families Institute, the Anglia-Ruskin University. And, this isn't my original work. I came across some work by Dr. Beverly Dexter, and she had developed an approach and taught it in a certain way, which I evaluated. And we were teaching it in basically a 2-hour group session to veterans with nightmares and PTSD. They either got that or sleep hygiene. And we did lots of sessions around the country involving lots of people. And the typical participants, they'd had nightmares for on average 14 years, which is really significant. These were not minor problems. And in terms of the results, there was really good, the 62 people that completed the dream completion technique, all but 3, so 3 got slightly worse due to other life circumstances going on. But of those 60, the 59 that were left, about half really put it into practice, and those are the ones who got 50% improvement. The whole cohort overall saw an improvement of about 30% in both the severity of the nightmares and also their reduction in IES scores, the trauma scores. And actually a third of those became less than 33, the clinical cutoff, which is kind of all very encouraging. But this is the slide which shows the different types of nightmares people were experiencing, which is, when we look at this, it's only the 30% that are the ones that you could currently be targeted. And that's what makes this technique really helpful, because if people are getting lots of different dreams through the week, it doesn't really matter. We're only dealing with where did the brain stop processing on the most recent dream, and then we go from there. And you can also see that there's 17% who didn't remember anything but had lots of disturbance. So there's a paper published which you can find, and all of this stuff is kind of on my website, or if you come and do the webinar, we give a resource pack out with everything in it, if you want to learn more about it. What I might do, because it's 20 past 4, so I'm actually bang on time, I'm going to carefully stop my screen share. And I'm going to just ask if there are any specific questions about the dream completion technique before I then move on to Flash. Will we get a copy of the PowerPoint slides? No, well, we're going to leave a recording up. So that'll be the main kind of vehicle. Unless someone said otherwise, but okay. Okay, let's just have a look down here. So I'm just looking for questions. Here's one on sleep. So sleep hygiene was the control group that I used in my research, but sleep hygiene is it's a combination of relaxation therapy, relaxation techniques, creating a decent environment for sleep, looking at your habits and behaviors around sleep, and then looking at more CBT for insomnia, which is thought framing and beliefs about sleep. Yeah, that's what sleep hygiene is. Sleeping tablets are they kind of knock you through the middle of your sleep cycle, if you like. So, I don't advise on medication, but generally when people, if there's no reason not to, there aren't really any contraindications for using this technique, basically. The worst that will happen is that you've given someone a dose of psychoeducation about their nightmares. Sleep paralysis is, actually we undergo mild sleep paralysis during REM sleep. So when someone wakes up out of REM sleep and feels paralyzed, they're actually still half asleep. And actually, most people panic because they maybe see hallucinations. The key there is for them to realize that they need to go back to sleep, and there's nothing. The key tenet of the dream completion technique is a change in perception that there's nothing to fear in your dreams. Someone's asked, is there a difference to nightmare rescripting? Yes, there are lots of differences, because nightmare rescripting can only apply to the fixed nightmares. You write out your nightmare, and then you're told to rewrite it in any shape you want. So this is a lot more nuanced and specific. And again, I'd encourage you to do the training on the 17th of July if you want to know the significant differences with that. For children and refugees, well, for children, this works well. Night terrors that toddlers have, this is different. That's a different thing. For refugees, you know, people might use art. In fact, I think Ginny somewhere is on the call, and they've used this in Yazidi refugee camps, and I think they've been really successful using art-based approaches for creating the new dream idea, which is really good. Okay, so there's probably a few people saying they've used it and it's done well, which is great. Do SSRIs interfere with it? They may do, but just keep going, you know, use the approach. I mean, again, back to the alcohol, if someone's drinking a bottle of scotch before they go to bed, which is not, I've come across a few of that, cases of that, then yeah, you're giving them a tool. The reason they're drinking the scotch is because they're fearful of the juggernaut coming down the road. If they stop being fearful of the juggernaut coming down the road, then they stand a better chance of not needing to do the drink. So you know, this is a stabilizer. It can be done outside of therapy. I mean, that's one of the other beauties. This is a therapeutic intervention. It's not therapy. There are lots of good questions. You know, why is outrunning an avalanche a bad idea? Well, generally, because unless you're really excited by the prospect of it, then it's not going to get in. You've got the new dream idea has got to be positively charged with emotion. So that's really good. Would it be acceptable to send the video to new patients? Yes, it would be. And yeah, EMDR, I said you can use it on fixed nightmares, but you're further down the line if you're starting to do this with clients. This is the dream completion technique is early doors natural EMDR. So I think what I'm going to need to do now is switch back so we can cover Flash and integration. So apologies if I've not got round to your questions. I'm now going to reshare the screen. And so the Flash technique developed by Phil Mansfield, he's an EMDR trainer in California. He's been over to the UK 2 or 3 times now doing trainings. If there's anybody that was on the April London or Birmingham trainings that's on the call and you still haven't had your refund, big apologies for that. The original version of Flash, which was written up in the 2017 article in the EMDR journal, that's where the name Flash came from. It was about flashing to a memory so quickly, it was like putting your hand through a flame and it didn't hurt. And that's why, and there's a significant number of people on here still doing that. And it was very effective, but the danger was then people getting stuck in the trauma. And the version that appeared after that, version 2, which is really trained, I think, September 2018, was discovering that we didn't need to flash to the memory. We could actually not flash to the memory at all and just do some blinking and we'd still get the same effect, which was amazing. You know, it's almost like a subliminal flashing. So we're going to cover the steps in a second. But it's important to realize there's an early and a late version. And one of the biggest issues is there are still a lot of people using the old version or even a concocted version. And so although Flash is really, really simple, it's really important to do it right. When you get to really difficult and not necessarily complex kinds, but when you get to really high-end trauma, you've got to do it right. Otherwise, you're just risking the thing that you're trying to avoid, which is triggering the client. So what is the Flash technique? It's brief, it's simple, it's effective, it's non-triggering, and it's all about reducing the intensity of trauma to set up your client for then moving on to EMDR processing. And so for some people, that might mean taking the SUDS from 10 to 5 and then moving on to EMDR. Other people, it might be, you know, taking it from 8 to 3. Some people go all the way to 0 with Flash, but that doesn't mean the job's done. And one of the key complementary factors is that Flash is quite specific and point, and it won't pick up all of the channels of association, which is why you then need to use EMDR, which is why EMDR is so good with it. So Flash, again, can be used very early on. You know, I've used it with new clients at the end of session 1, just to take a bit off the top of the trauma, give them some confidence. But you've got to really know what you're doing with that. So often it will, you know, more than often it will be session 2, particularly if obviously if we've done some nightmare work, there wouldn't be time to do any flash. But it doesn't require stabilization in the way that we kind of know it. And this is interesting because it kind of crosses over into Ad de Jong's work, where the kind of you don't need to do the stabilization. But it is different because we're not triggering anything. And if some of you that remember from some of the association talk, there's a lot of, in fact, they're deliberately triggering stuff to try and purge it from the system. But that's a whole different ball game. We're not going to talk about that. So, but this is most important. Flash must be done right, and it requires the utmost care with the most traumatic memories. Otherwise, you're still going to, I don't want to say blunder about, but when you've got a traumatic memory that just the mere word or the mere can activate it, you've got to be ever so careful. It's almost like holding a very, very fragile vase. You just got to be so careful. So we're doing okay for time. It's 4:30. So these are the key steps of the flash technique. Now, although yes, you can learn it in 2 minutes, which is what I'm going to teach it essentially, it really does take the full webinar to really understand it in detail and to troubleshoot and to know why it's not working and what to do. And I've seen my kind of success rate definitely get better as I've got more experience with it. The first thing is we don't really do a big explanation with the clients. It's generally, we're going to try this technique. It's very safe. We're not going to be talking about anything. You don't need to tell me anything. And we're just going to help the brain process some of the trauma in the background that you're not even aware of. And sometimes I might use the example of, what happens if have you ever had the experience of forgetting a word and half an hour later it pops back in? Most people would nod. And it's like, well, what was happening in that half an hour? The brain was churning around and doing some stuff, but it was out of your conscious awareness. And so it is with flash. So we identify the target. Now, if this is a SUD 10, very, very delicate, highly triggering target, you're not even going to, you're just going to use the event, and that'll be it. You're not going to start doing history taking on this target, because the act of history taking will trigger it. That's what I mean by holding it like a vase. Now, but if it was a SUD 6 to 8, yes, you would. What's the name of the event, and how disturbing out of 10 does it feel? Or if you were to know how disturbing out of 10, how much would it be? So you just got to be careful. Then we switch to this thing called the positive engaging focus, which some people think is a calm place, but it's not. And what we're trying to do with flash is to fully occupy the front part of someone's mind in doing something or thinking about something, or listening to music, or, to be honest, the most effective one I've had is just talking. I could do flash now with we could do a demonstration in flash with everyone here just because you're listening to me talk. And if we were having a one-to-one, that's the best way. So if it's and if people are really struggling for stuff, which if someone's depressed, then that's going to be more challenging. But just getting them to talk through something they've done recently, or talking about a hobby or something they like doing, or where have they been recently, or let's talk about your favorite. If you see something behind them, I'm talking about Zoom here, but I've talked about someone's CD collection, and we just you're just having a chat really. But whilst they're doing this positive engaging focus, you've given them the instruction that and there's two ways. There's a kind of I just want you to follow this as we're talking, and then every so often I'm going to say the word blink, and when I say the word blink, I just want you to blink 3 times like this, and then you get them to show you, and that's really all it is. Now you can sometimes do taps instead of the slow BLS, and sometimes you don't even do the BLS at all. It's not EMDR. It's just enhancing the distraction, because that's really what this is about. It's completely distracting the client away from the trauma. And then we do, what we do then is they're in the positive engaging focus, we're doing the slow stuff, and then we do 5 to 8 of these triple blinks. And I may not even have called it the flash technique. Some people keep the word flash in. I've kind of lost it because I deal with military people. When they've been blown up, you don't say the word flash. People have been sexually assaulted, you don't really want to say the word flash. So I just call it the blink technique, and we say the word blink. You don't even have to say blink 3 times, you just say blink. because they're going to be engaged with something. You're going to be talking about it. They're going to be telling you about their new pet dog or whatever it is, and then you just say blink, and then oh, do that, and then carry on. And that's kind of how it works. And then the most important thing when working with the really high-end memory, really high-end trauma, is you don't then say, well, go back to the time when you were raped as a child and tell me what you noticed. You can't do any of that. It's, you know, when you go back to what we started with over there, do you notice any change, which is a binary yes, no. And if they say no, then you go straight back and carry on. And sometimes you might need to do 1 or 2 sets to notice any change. And then we repeat that. We may do, you know, 3, 4 sets and see what happens. Now, the key question is, well, what happens if nothing happens, you know, and you're thinking, what's the client thinking as you're doing all this kind of chatting to them and saying the word blink? So in terms of troubleshooting, the first key one is the trauma intruding into the PEF? So are they actually thinking about the trauma? And you can ask that question. And that's generally because the engaging focus isn't strong enough. So if you ask them to imagine, you know, doing a favorite sport and didn't say anything, then it's more likely to happen. But I've never found it when they're telling you about their favorite day out walking or whatever it was. The second, and then after that, really the reason, if the flash doesn't work, then EMDR is unlikely to work too, because there's another broader problem, which is the same as troubleshooting EMDR, which is there's a blocking belief. You know, if this goes away, then X, Y, Z, or there's a feeder memory, in which case you need to do a float back or a bridge to an earlier memory to establish that target. And if you found that target, you could use flash on that. Or if it wasn't so, depending on the intensity of it, you might go straight into EMDR. It all depends. Probably the thing I haven't said is, let's just go back to this bit. So let's say we've done 1 set and we return to target. Do you notice any change? No. And actually that's not uncommon. You know, don't take that too personally. Then switch back to the engaging focus, do another 5 to 8 triple blinks. And it doesn't matter if you do 9. I mean, we don't really know why triple blinks is the best thing, but it seems to be pretty good. And then return again. And if you return to the target a second time and they say, and you said, do you notice any change? And they said, no. That's where you might then say, and the kind of change we're expecting is it might feel a bit more distant, or it might feel a bit less intense. Those are really the 2 things we're looking at. You might say, you know, was what we started with, because we don't call it the trauma if it's really intense, with what we started with, was that kind of coming into your mind a bit? And if they said yes, then that's your troubleshooting. Okay, let's make this a bit more interactive now. But as I said, the more I've done with it, the more I've found that just having a conversation over something with the client is really the most engaging thing. But I think there are seasons. A lot of people use music, which is great. But you know, there's lots of flexibility, but it's so much broader than a calm place. You can even use body sensations, catching. You know, I've thrown balls at my webcam and they catch it, and all this kind of stuff. You know, it's horses for courses, and that's part of the experience of learning it, and also going on the trainings to learn all the variety. But typically, you know, you might do 3 sets and it might go from a 9 down to a 6 or something like that, but that's great, because you then have the opportunity to switch straight into assessment stage 3, phase 3, and then you're perfectly set up to then carry on with EMDR, which is kind of what we're going to talk about now. So yeah, it should really be quite seamless. It's not like you're putting one folder out, you know, and putting one folder away and getting another one out. So, you know, you'll be straight in with so when you think about that, and by now you can obviously call it by what it is, you know, which is the worst part, what image represents the worst part, and do your standard protocol setup, and then move into fast eye movements. Yeah. And as we're here, I tend to use this now, an extendable one, which actually I got from Phil Mansfield originally, and find it's fine actually for online work, you know, I'd kind of use it like that and it works fine. And then obviously face-to-face work, if we ever get back to it, is good. I do actually sell these, and you'll find them on my website under resources. They're £12.50. But again, it's not a big sales pitch, but they are really handy. And you can, I mean, if you bulk at spending the money, you can find these quite easily. But it took me a long time to find these little beasts, which magnetically sit on the end. But it seems to work well. I've just gone away from any technology because it invariably can fail. And this just seems like a nice, handy way of doing it. So, but this is where EMDR really comes into its own, because let's say you get the SUDS down to 0 on whatever the target was, then you're going to go back in and you're going to explore that and root around to see if there are any other channels of association. But once you've kind of taken the top of it with Flash, you've then just got, you know, there's a lot less pressure because you've not got that kind of anxiety that you're going to, you know, you're going to get on a runaway train. And I've only had it once with a client where, you know, they properly dissociated and we had to stand up and walk out the room or walk around the block. And I never want that to happen again. And touch wood, that hasn't happened. Although I've got to say, I don't work exclusively with complex clients in secondary or tertiary care. So that's a reasonable point. So we're establishing channels of association, and then we're processing it as per standard protocol. And, you know, and if you came across something else that was really gnarly, you can switch back. I've done this once before, actually, in fact, yesterday, where we started processing standard protocol, and then I was a bit surprised how much was coming up. And so we just backed out of it, went straight to the calm place. That worked really well. You know, the affect came down, and then we just switched straight to Flash. And that's what we did. And that worked well. And then we were able to use Flash, and then we switched back to EMDR. So it really is flexible. This is not, you know, complete prescription. It's just a tool in the armory that I find to be really effective. And it doesn't require, it's just flexible in how it's used. And of course, we install the PC and body scan as usual. So everything is normal as per EMDR standard protocol. And that's an important point to mention. We're doing great for time, actually. So we've still got 20 minutes. I've got a few key comments on Flash now. So the other interesting thing with Flash is you can target you can do broader targets. So I worked with somebody who'd had 2 quite significant periods of childhood sexual abuse over a number of years, each one, you know, with different perpetrators. So the first target was, you know, aged 4 to 6. So the target literally was what happened, you know, with what happened to you when age 4 to 6. We didn't say anything more than that. And that's what we did Flash on. And that worked really well. And so you're just bringing it all down. I mean, and then when the client came back the next session, he said, I've been able to talk about it with my girlfriend, which I've never ever done before. And then you're just in a space where you can then, you know, do your classical targeting of, you know, so when you think about that time period now, which is the worst one now. And again, if you were surprised and it came up bigger than you thought, you'd switch back into Flash. It's also another interesting phenomenon is if you've got several targets. So I had someone whose, you know, dad was pretty nasty to her and all her children and siblings, and, you know, she could reel off 4 or 5 quite significant, you know, times when he lost the plot. You know, one was in the kitchen, one was in the bathroom, one was in the cow shed or whatever. And, you know, they became targets 1, 2, 3, and 4. I had a SUDS for each one, ranging from 5 to 8 or whatever. I wouldn't do this for 10, of course. You know, with a target of 10, or a target that you know is 10, because you're not going to ask them, is it a 10? You're back into that vase territory. You know, you're holding one vase, and that's what you're really focused on. But when you've got the lower SUDS, you know, several targets, and then switch to the positive engaging focus, do your blinks as normal. And then when you switch back to say, do you notice any change? You go, okay, so, you know, the thing in the kitchen, do you notice any change? Yes. Okay, what is that? Oh, it feels further away. That's great. when we go to the bathroom, do you notice any change? No. Okay. When we go to the cow shed, do you notice any change? Yes. And then you just and then switch back to the positive engaging focus. You don't then go, well, I'll drop that one because of that's had more change. You're just doing a broad brush approach to bring down the level of distress, and that seems to work really well. And it's another thing to know about. Flash can also bypass some avoidance, intellectualization, and dissociative barriers. I'm less experienced in this area, so I've got one client at the moment, and there's a kind of a big barrier thing going on, and I'm actually going to try Flash with that because, yeah. And the other thing with Flash is it's very helpful to use with OCD, and you kind of ask them the question, what is it they don't want to feel, and then switch to Flash. So there's lots of kind of nuances. If you do the training, there's a listserv now with another 1,500, 2,000 people. So again, you get some interesting questions and cases, and people using it in all sorts of different ways, which is really good, and especially during these COVID times. And as I said, I call it the blink technique, and there's no, Phil's not offended by that. The word flash came from that original concept of flashing to the memory or not. So I mentioned this at the beginning, is that when we've sorted out any sleep issues that are there, and we may have used Flash, when we get into trauma processing, it goes nice and steadily. And again, Flash reduces, in the early days, until I started using Flash, some clients would be absolutely drained and zapped by the end of a session because of the processing, because it was heavy duty. I'm noticing that a lot less now with people that we're doing Flash and then switching to EMDR. So I think that's another benefit. It's less of a roller coaster, which is good. It means it's more tolerable, and I don't think. I mean, some people hypothesize that Flash means that people are then avoiding the worst of the trauma. I don't think that's the case. It's still processing what's going on. It's just happening in the background. In the same way, the dream completion technique is helping the brain process it whilst you're asleep. So I don't agree with that kind of Flash is somehow kind of hiding it away for a rainy day. I think it is the core processing is happening. And as I said, if EMDR processing, when you get to it, is smoother, that's a a big bonus. Fewer interweaves, fewer dotting around, more straightforward processing, which is great. But more research is needed, particularly on the Flash. I mean, and on the dream completion technique. We always need more research, but obviously how they all interlink with EMDR is quite new, and I found that this works well, and I'm interested in how it all fits together, and it seems to make sense. But more research is needed. So that ends the formal part, which is great because it means we've got 15 minutes for questions. So you can email me afterwards, and my website has also got links for the future trainings for Flash and DCT, and then these are the links on screen, which don't worry about copying them down because I'm going to paste them into the chat box too. So we got a 2-hour dream completion technique training on the 17th of July, which is donation only. And then the Flash technique, which is organized through California, is on the 24th of July, which is 6 hours. The first 3 hours are recorded, and then I'm doing the Q&A in the background because of the time difference. And then the second 3 hours is Phil Mansfield and Lewis Engel, and that works really, really well. Lots of live demos and troubleshooting. That's where you really get the benefit, is seeing Phil Mansfield do the troubleshooting when Flash doesn't seem to be working, and that's really beneficial. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm going to say hello to everyone. We've still got 498 people, which is amazing. And before I go to questions, I'm going to have my first little go at posting into the chat room to everyone. Yeah, all of the links. I don't know how well that will work. Oh yeah, there you go. So there's the evaluation form for the webinar, the links sheet, the CPD certificate, and the latest podcast, which is worth looking at. And now I'm got a bit of chance to look up at the questions and have a drink of water. So we've done really well, actually, so that we can do some questions and stuff. And I'm going to work up from the bottom. So hopefully everyone's got the chat box open. You can have it open and see the screens at the same time. Okay, so good question. Do the SUDs always match when you go and do your, when you switch from Flash to EMDR? And yes, they should. I mean, sometimes with, SUDs is subjective units of disturbance. So, sometimes I might do Flash and it might go from a nominal 10 to a 6, and then the next session they come back in and it starts at a 7. Well, I'm not going to worry too much about that. But if it started back up really, really high, like back up in the top, I kind of wonder what was going on to try and understand that. Okay. Yeah, so that's in terms of SUDs. So yes, there can be a bit of variability between the two, but don't forget, it depends what you're targeting. You see, if you targeted, the ages of 2 to 4 and all of the abuse that happened in that period of time, and then you bring that down and then you switch to EMDR to a time, age 2 in the front room, then of course it may be different. It may still be higher. You may still need to use Flash with that. It all depends. You got the option. You got flexibility, which is the key thing. Yeah, the SurveyMonkey website, I wasn't sure whether it just meant I couldn't access my account. I was hoping the link would still work. So that's a bit disappointing, because you're probably, the only way you can do that is if you save the link. It was down for 12 hours, so till by tomorrow morning it'll be up again. So I really, really appreciate feedback on the webinar, because we're getting a CPD point for it. So I would encourage you, when I'll put the links back in at the end, just copy and paste them all onto a Word document and then use them in the morning. Link to the journal paper, you'll find that on my LinkedIn profile, but yeah, I should put it on my website. So let's get to some questions though. Let's get some questions. So you shouldn't have to sign up to Dropbox to access the other links, but maybe other people can tell me. Right, specific question, an issue with veterans. Well, yes, scoring of questionnaires, all or nothing. Well, yeah, I mean, that's yeah, that potentially always going to be a problem. Just because we've done all of those links, I've now got questions about Flash in there. I've kind of, sorry, question about SurveyMonkey. I've lost some of the questions to answer. And so I just need to go back up. Flash with OCD. Yeah, I haven't actually used it, but it's just the fact that OCD, what is the behavior avoiding? And it's the avoidance is the thing that people don't want to go to, which makes it harder to access for EMDR, but easier. It's almost like they're kind of consciously identifying what they want to avoid, and that's kind of set it into working memory so that then you can do Flash on it. I'm not an expert on it, I've got to say. So okay, so a supervisee in the NHS has been asked whether she can use Flash for groups. She's not group or Flash trained, so advised. No, that makes sense. Right, group format. So yes, Flash can be done in groups. So I've got one supervisee who's trialing it actually within the schools with teachers in the kind of coming back to school thing. So yes, Flash has been effectively used in groups. In fact, Phil Mansfield is doing a kind of groups. I'm not sure if it's happened yet, up to 300 people on a webinar, and nurses in Pennsylvania, to get them to work on a target. Obviously they don't share it, and they're coming up with a PDF, and then he's saying, and then they're doing the blinks and stuff. So it is possible, and I think for in person, having people sat in a circle, 8 people with a facilitator, you could throw a ball around, a tennis ball, and people, and then the facilitator says blink, and I think it will work really well. Yeah, there are lots of questions here. I can't respond. Like, can I go back to the my email and stuff. Yeah, maybe this is what we need to do, as we've still got 5 minutes, is if I haven't answered your question, please type those questions now, and then I'll see them at the bottom. That is probably the very best thing to do. A few people have asked, are there going to be recordings of the 17th on dream completion? Yeah, if people get in touch with me at mail@justinhavens.com, I can sort something out for that. How long do we get the client to chat before blinking? Well, you know, sometimes my chat about what we're going to chat about, I'll start, because they're even taxing their working memory, thinking about what we're going to chat about. So you can start doing the blinking very quickly. Yes, dream completion can be used with people with dissociative disorders. Yeah. Yeah, I've not really found any kind of contraindications for, well, actually for either of those two, either flash or the dream completion technique. Okay. Has any, yeah. How do we get a copy of the PowerPoint for today? Well, that'll be in the same link folder. I'm not 100% sure. I wasn't going to put my PowerPoint in there because it's all kind of new material, but we were making the recording available. Yeah, so a question, this is interesting, about if clients are on medication or considered unstable for EMDR, well, why are they considered unstable? And very often the reason for instability is because of the trauma that's there. So flash could be a good option. Likewise, if they've got nightmares, you know, you're only helping them access their own natural healing resources. So it really should be fine. So we've got someone here, yeah, I've used dream completion with someone with DID and it helped reduce her nightmares, which is superb. Could flash be used on a prison officer after a bad assault who's still in work? Yes, I mean, the same thing as any trauma-focused therapy. When the threat is still there, it's if you process the past, they'll feel less anxiety in the present. So it's definitely a good thing to do. Does it work for future situations that someone is concerned about? Well, that's actually, you will have, someone may have heard of flash forward, which is confusing because it's a very different thing. Flash forward is kind of targeting the worst case future scenario, which can be a helpful thing to do. You could target it with EMDR or you could target it with flash. So you could do flash on a flash forward, which is a little bit there. Do you encourage the client to talk during flash? Yes, all the time. I've learned lots of really interesting things actually, which is another thing, you know. Talking about people's favorite films, that's a nice one, or what they've watched during lockdown or anything like that. The CPD certificate is also going to be in the folder where the recording is, so that's important to say. It sounds like my attempts at linking links has been poor. Hopefully everyone will promise to fill in that survey in the morning, please. Which would be great. And I'm going to put those links up again now. Sounds like GTEP. Interestingly, the links are working well. Thank you, Rachel. So yeah, the Survey Monkey, I'm almost inclined to try it myself now, but that one's definitely off, means wait till the morning. So leave it on your laptop or whatever it is so you can pick it up in the morning. Hopefully all of the other ones will work because that's kind of got everything there. And please do tell colleagues about the other training. Using flash technique with pregnant women struggling with birth trauma intrusions from the past, yes. And now again, this hasn't been researched. If it felt you couldn't do EMDR at that point, which is reasonable, so I don't want to say I recommend it and then there's a problem. I haven't come across any real bad experiences with flash, and I don't think anyone has. And Phil they've done thousands now that have been logged. So I would say it's safe, but it's always dangerous to make those kind of sweeping statements. I think you need to still judge each case. My email address is mail@justinhavens.com, which is great. Dropbox, those Dropbox things should kind of work. Maybe you do need a Dropbox account, but you'll still find what you need in the resource folder eventually. So that's good. But look, it's been superb. It's been superb. My God, that's a big link. Is that the link for the folder? That's amazing. So it's nearly 5 o'clock, which is definitely wine o'clock possibly for us. What I'm going to do in a second is the John Wilson, who I do my online webinars for the dream completion. What he does is he unmutes everyone and lets everyone say goodbye, which with 500 people is going to be bloody noisy. So, but there seems to be, I'm not going to do it quite yet, but there seems